Because even in the most joyful unions, the undercurrents of unmet needs, unspoken truths, and divergent paths can lead to separation. Carl Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of becoming one's true self. In relationships, this journey can sometimes lead partners in different directions despite shared happiness. As individuals grow and evolve, their paths may no longer align, leading to the difficult decision to part ways. Moreover, societal expectations often pressure couples to maintain the appearance of happiness, even when underlying issues persist. This facade can mask deep-seated incompatibilities, preventing authentic communication and growth. Over time, the dissonance between outward happiness and inner dissatisfaction can become untenable, resulting in divorce. It's also important to recognize that happiness is multifaceted. A couple may share joyful moments, yet struggle with aspects like intimacy, communication, or personal fulfillment. These challenges, if unaddressed, can erode the foundation of the relationship, leading to its dissolution. In essence, the decision to divorce, even among happy couples, often stems from a complex interplay of personal growth, unmet needs, and the pursuit of authenticity. It's a testament to the human desire for a life that aligns with one's true self, even when it means letting go of a relationship that once brought joy. Because joy is not the same as alignment, and laughter is not the same as depth. You can share a bed, a history, 1,000 beautiful memories, and still feel your soul whisper, "This is not where I grow anymore." It's not that you stopped loving them. It's that love alone stopped being enough. Not because it failed, but because it was built on the version of you that no longer exists. You see, happy people still divorce because somewhere along the journey, they stopped choosing each other with presence. They were choosing the memory, the comfort, the image, but not the person standing in front of them who had changed, evolved, expanded, sometimes in opposite directions. And no one talks about this. No one talks about how happiness can still be real, while evolution is quietly pulling you apart. How two people can sit across from each other, smiling, laughing, even holding hands, and still know they're living on separate timelines now. Carl Jung called this individuation. The sacred, terrifying process of becoming who you truly are. Not who the world needs you to be, not who your partner fell in love with, but who your soul refuses to silence anymore. And sometimes the price of that authenticity is the ending of something beautiful. Not because it was wrong, but because it was complete. Because in the deepest parts of ourselves, we know when something is no longer alive. Even if it still looks good on the outside, even if the vacations are still fun, even if the sex is still decent, even if the kids are thriving and the photos look perfect, but there's a silence, a space between the words that used to be filled with wonder, a knowing in your bones that you're no longer growing together, you're just growing near each other. And that space, that invisible distance, becomes the wound no one wants to acknowledge. Because to admit it would mean confronting a truth that terrifies us all. That love alone is not enough to sustain a shared life. That compatibility, alignment, mutual evolution, they matter more over time, not less. And so many couples stay because they think happiness means don't rock the boat. Because they think gratitude should silence growth. Because they fear hurting each other more than they fear betraying themselves. But the ones who leave, not out of rage or betrayal, but out of reverence, they are the ones who understand that honoring the relationship sometimes means setting it free. Jung would call it a sacred death, not a failure, not a tragedy, but a rite of passage, the conscious uncoupling of two souls who once met each other at just the right moment to teach, to mirror, to hold, but who must now part so that both can continue their separate paths toward wholeness. And that is a different kind of love. A love that says, I see you, I honor what we were, but I will not ask either of us to stay small, just to preserve something that no longer fits. That kind of love is not impulsive. It's not cruel. It's not selfish. It's brave. It's the kind of love that understands the highest expression of devotion is not in clinging, but in witnessing the truth, even when it hurts. And here's the truth. Some relationships are meant to end well, not in chaos, not in betrayal, but in maturity, in a mutual recognition that what brought us here cannot carry us forward, that the story has ended, not with bitterness, but with grace. And maybe the world doesn't understand that. Maybe people will ask, but weren't you happy? And you'll say yes, and you'll mean it. But happiness is not the same as truth. And truth is what your soul came here for. So you walk away, not because you didn't love them, but because you finally love yourself enough to not mistake comfort for destiny. And that is the sacred paradox of the awakened heart. To love deeply and still let go. To be grateful and still say goodbye. To walk away, not because it was bad, but because you are no longer who you were when it began. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most honest kind of ending. Not a rupture, but a release. Not a collapse, but the conscious closing of a chapter that served its purpose with dignity. You don't burn the photos. You don't rewrite the past. You don't pretend it wasn't real. Because it was real. It mattered. It shaped you. It awakened pieces of you that had been asleep for years. But now you carry those pieces forward on your own. Not as fragments, but as foundations. Because the love that once held you is not gone. It's transformed. It lives in how you speak to yourself now, in how you hold space for your becoming, in how you no longer abandon yourself for someone else's comfort. Carl Jung taught us that the self is not discovered. It is remembered through every mirror, every conflict, every love that peels back the layers we mistook for our identity. And sometimes a relationship is the fire that burns away what you are not, so you can finally stand in what you are. That's why happy people still divorce. Not because the joy was fake, but because the journey continued beyond the borders of what the relationship could contain. And in that space, in that brave, quiet space of letting go, you become something more, not less, more honest, more whole, more you, not in defiance, but in reverence, not in rebellion against the life you built together, but in gratitude for the way it awakened you to the life you were still meant to build alone. Because the truth is, we don't always grow in parallel. We don't always evolve at the same speed, in the same direction, under the same sky. And to expect that is to chain love to something it was never meant to be. Predictable love, real love, isn't always a forever home. Sometimes it's a lighthouse, a guiding flame that gets you through a storm, but disappears once you've found your shore. And when you reach that shore, when you stand barefoot and trembling on the edge of your new life, you don't resent the lighthouse for not following you. You bow to it. You whisper, "Thank you for bringing me this far." And you walk forward. That walk, that sacred walk into the unknown, is the quiet revolution of the soul. And Jung would remind you, this is not the death of love. It is its transformation. It is the moment love becomes something bigger than romance. It becomes liberation. Liberation from the idea that love means staying. Liberation from the belief that endings are failures. Liberation from the lie that you must choose between your happiness and your truth. You don't. Not anymore. Because now you understand love is not measured by duration. It is measured by depth, by the transformation it catalyzed, by how deeply it made you confront yourself. Not just the beautiful parts, but the shadow, the silence, the unmet longings you buried to keep the peace. Love that ends with honor is still love. It is still sacred. It still belongs in your story. So when people ask, "But weren't you happy?" you can say yes and still walk away, because you finally understand happiness is not the same as home. Home is where you are becoming. Home is where your truth breathes. Home is where your soul is not just seen, but supported in its evolution. And sometimes, to protect that home, you have to walk alone for a while. Not in loneliness, but in integrity. Because this journey isn't about perfect endings. It's about authentic ones. It's about standing at the edge of your life and saying with open hands, "I loved, I grew, I outgrew, and I refuse to lie to myself in the name of comfort." That's not a failure. That's freedom. That is what it means to live and love like someone who has finally remembered who they are. And when you remember who you are, when the mask falls, when the roles dissolve, when the performance ends, you do something extraordinary. You stop asking relationships to save you. You stop begging happiness to prove your worth. You stop gripping what's familiar just to avoid the ache of letting go. Instead, you rise. You let the silence speak. You let the ending teach. You let the grief carve space for something truer. Not a quick replacement, not a rebound fantasy, but a deeper intimacy with yourself. The self that no longer tolerates connection without resonance, proximity without presence, or love that requires you to shrink in order to survive. And slowly, life begins again. Not because you found someone new, but because you found you. And when you do love again, when the time comes to build something different, you won't build it from fear. You won't build it from need. You'll build it from wholeness, from sovereignty, from the radical knowing that you are already complete. That kind of love doesn't fear endings. It honors cycles. It honors growth. It honors the sacred courage to let something die so that something more honest can be born. Because the goal was never to stay. The goal was to become, and you, my friend, have become more than even love could have imagined. You've become the kind of person who doesn't need a relationship to feel real, but chooses one that deepens your reality. Not to complete you, but to witness you, to walk beside you, not in front or behind. You've become the kind of person who can look back at what ended and not see failure, but fulfillment. A chapter that closed not because it was empty, but because it was full, because it gave you everything it could, because it birthed you into a new dimension of truth. And now, if you no longer fear walking alone, because you walk aligned, aligned with your values, aligned with your evolution, aligned with your deepest, quietest knowing. This is the gift of awakening. Not that you'll never grieve again, not that life will spare you heartache, but that you'll never again betray your soul to keep a story alive that no longer breathes. You will walk forward. You will rebuild. And you will do so without shame. Because the world needs more people who tell the truth about the endings, who don't sugarcoat the goodbyes, who don't pretend the happiness wasn't real, but also don't deny when it was no longer enough. This is your liberation. This is your legacy. Not a marriage that lasted forever, but a life that remained true to who you are becoming. And that is love. That is holiness. That is the kind of happiness that doesn't need permission to exist. Because now you know some endings are not tragedies. They are initiations into sovereignty, into truth, into a version of love that no longer requires you to disappear inside it. And the next time love finds you, it won't ask you to dim. It won't punish your growth. It won't fear your becoming. It will celebrate the miles you've walked alone. It will hold your past with reverence and your future with gentleness. Because you've changed. And that change is not loss, it's liberation. You are no longer the person who stays because it looks good on paper. You are the person who stays only when it feels right in your soul. That kind of clarity is rare. It's costly. It takes years. But you paid the price. You stayed through the fire. You watched yourself burn. And you did not run. You stood in the ashes and built something real. Something you didn't have before. Peace. Not the peace of avoidance. The peace of alignment. Of knowing that your happiness is not a performance, but the frequency you now live in, because you dare to let go of what no longer matched it. You are not just someone who loved, you are someone who evolved through love. And when it ended, you let it teach you. That is what makes you whole. That is what makes you free. Free no, in the way the world romanticizes freedom, as detachment, as isolation, as never needing anyone again, but as integrity. The freedom to enter love as a choice, not a survival mechanism. The freedom to leave, not in haste, but in harmony with your deepest knowing. And now, you no longer need to be understood by those who only measure success by what lasts the longest. You are not here to perform longevity. You are here to live authenticity. You are here to honor seasons, to recognize that some love is a summer brilliant, burning, unforgettable. And some love is a winter quiet, internal, preparing you for what's next. You do not shame the summer for ending. You do not beg the winter to stay. You listen. You learn. You let go. And in doing so, you become someone who walks with grace through every threshold of the heart, no longer clinging to permanence, no longer fearing change, but welcoming each moment as a messenger from your soul. This is the maturity of real love. Not the kind that clutches, but the kind that expands. The kind that knows sometimes the greatest act of devotion is to say, I will not hold you back from becoming who you were born to be, even if that means you must become it without me. That is love. That is healing. That is the kind of ending that writes a new beginning. Not just in your life, but in your spirit. And in your spirit, A quiet revolution has taken place. Not loud, not dramatic, but profound. Because you no longer chase closure like it's something old. You are the closure. You are the voice that says, I see the beauty in what was, and I release it not because it didn't matter, but because it did. You don't need to justify the leaving. You don't need to defend the decision. You don't need to explain how you can still feel gratitude while walking away. You simply know in your body, in your bones, in the space where clarity lives, that the chapter is complete. You loved. You grew. You outgrew. You ended well. And now you live with a kind of peace that only comes from doing what few are brave enough to do. Leave the good when the good is no longer true. This is not the kind of happiness that fades. It's not the high of escaping. It's not the thrill of rebellion. It's the grounded joy of alignment. The stillness after the storm. The breath you didn't realize you were holding for years. Now, it's yours. All of it. The freedom, the silence, the love no longer distorted by duty or fear. Just love, clean, clear, liberated. And so are you. Liberated not from the relationship, but from the illusion that staying always equals strength. Liberated from the weight of pretending, from the quiet ache of misalignment, from the narrative that says leaving means losing. Because you didn't lose. You chose. You chose truth over illusion, expansion over tradition, growth over stagnation. And now you move through the world differently. You speak more slowly because you no longer rush to fill the silence. You listen more deeply because you've learned how sacred it is to be understood. You love more gently because you know now the strongest bonds are never built in fear. They are built in presence, in permission, in mutual becoming. And should you choose love again, you will not do it to be completed. You will do it to be mirrored, to be challenged, not fixed, to walk beside someone who is not afraid of how brightly you begun to shine, because you shine now, not in arrogance, but in peace, not in noise, but in truth, not to prove your worth, but because you've reclaimed it. You've outgrown the story that says happiness must be sacrificed to keep love alive. And you've written a new one. I will never again abandon myself for the comfort of another. And that vow, that quiet final vow, is the foundation of everything you're building next. And what you're building now isn't just a new life. It's a new relationship with yourself. One rooted in reverence, not repair, not fixing what someone else broke, but honoring what you've rebuilt with your own hands. This is the foundation. A soul no longer fragmented, a voice no longer silenced, a heart no longer waiting to be chosen because it has finally chosen itself. And from that wholeness, everything changes. Love becomes softer. Boundaries become clearer. Desire becomes cleaner, not twisted in shame, not camouflaged in codependency, but felt in its raw, radiant purity. You won't settle again, not because you've hardened, but because you softened into your truth. You've learned that endings can be sacred, that walking away can be a form of love, that two happy people, it can still grow into separate happinesses. And that too is a miracle. You no longer chase permanence. You chase presence. And in that presence, you no longer need to be perfect. You just need to be honest. Because honesty is now your compass. Not obligation, not fantasy, not fear. And wherever that compass leads you, you'll follow. Not because you lost, but because you're finally free. Free to begin again without dragging old ghosts into new gardens. Free to meet love with open eyes, not wounded expectations. Free to receive without gripping, to give without disappearing, to walk away without abandoning yourself in the process. This is the quiet power you carry now. Not loud, not performative, just undeniable. The power of someone who has learned that a relationship doesn't have to be forever to be meaningful. That love isn't validated by its longevity, but by its ability to awaken you to parts of yourself you had forgotten. And now you remember. You remember what you need. You remember what you deserve. You remember how sacred your own becoming truly is. So you don't chase anymore. You attract. You don't perform. You embody. You don't beg to be seen. You stand in full view, unapologetic, whole, radiating the truth of someone who has walked through endings and emerged more alive. This is your invitation now, to live not in fear of the next ending, but in celebration of the next becoming. Because love might leave again, and it might return again, but you will never leave yourself. And that is the love that will carry you into every future worth having. That is the love that no divorce can take, no silence can erase, no absence can diminish. It is the love that remains when all the stories fade, when the house is quiet, when the rings come off, when the future you imagined no longer exists. It is the love that greets you in the mirror every morning, the love that whispers, you are enough, even now, especially now, because what you've built in yourself is not conditional. It doesn't depend on who stays, who understands, who affirms. It is rooted in the soil of your own soul, nourished by every moment you chose. Honesty over illusion, expansion over comfort, and truth over tradition. You've lived, you've lost, you've loved, and still you are here, standing taller, breathing deeper, walking lighter, not because the ending didn't hurt, but because it healed. And now, with nothing left to prove, and everything still ahead, you begin again. Not from scratch, but from wisdom, with your heart intact, your integrity sharpened, and your soul finally aligned with the truth it always knew. You were never meant to stay small, just to keep something whole. You were meant to grow, to evolve, to love bravely, and let go gracefully. And now you are doing exactly that. So when they ask, why did it end if you are happy? You'll smile, not with bitterness, but with clarity. You'll say, because happiness wasn't the whole story, because I changed, because we both did, and because love, real love, sometimes means knowing when to let go. This isn't the end of your heart. It's the beginning of your wholeness. You did not fail. You listened. You learned. You honored what was true, even when it hurt. And now you carry nothing but freedom. Not the freedom to run, but the freedom to stay with yourself, no matter where life leads. You are not broken. You are becoming. And one day, someone will meet you, not because they complete you, but because they see the fire you became in the ashes of what you once outgrew. That is not a tragedy. That is transcendence. And you are finally free to rise.